you're going to work on almost whenever you have working on reporting, you are working on some kind of data processing. So most of the time we use Excel sheets only for data processing. Okay, so there are 3 or 4 different ways of how you can process the data when you're using Excel. So most of the things will be processed in these 3 or 4 ways only. Okay, and you can also once you understand and you know how to work on Excel, you can always explore more ideas. But usually it is going to be fitting, whatever data that you get will be fitting under these 2 or 3 scenarios, and you will be able to process those scenarios. Okay, except for the data format could be different, or the size of the data would be bigger. Okay, here we might be processing only 3 rows of data or 10 rows of data. There in real time you might be processing huge number of data. Okay, more than thousands or lakhs of data will be what you will be processing. So the idea remains the same. So we'll teach you the idea of how you will be processing, how can you take cell by cell, or how can you loop through information, right? So this works for just not Excel. Whenever you're going to have kind of information where you're going to have structured information, like similar to an Excel format. So when I say similar to an Excel format, whenever you're going to have rows and columns, so you can use the similar method and you can use it, or almost a similar method can be used whenever you're taking it from either database or anything, except for the connection is going to be different. Okay, first you have to connect UiPath Studio to Excel, right? So similarly, you might be connecting UiPath Studio to database. So that will be the only difference, right? So now when we say Excel automation, consider I'm going to have an Excel sheet. Okay, this is what you're going to tell me in the manual case. So consider I have an Excel sheet, and I'm going to say I have the list of my employees. I have their first name and the last name. Now I want to make sure that I get their full names based on the concatenation that I'm going to do. Okay, so what will I do manually for this particular the activity? What would my manual steps be? Okay, but before that, should we not open this Excel? After opening your Excel, you're going to read this entire content to see what until where your data is, correct? So this is going to be basically the 2 important steps whenever you're going to connect to any application, or whenever you're going to do any kind of automation. The first thing is you're going to open that particular application. You could typically open the application, or you could typically run the application from background, whatever. Okay, so this is what you will be doing. So open the application, and then you're going to read the entire information, right? So if I say read information, then only you will understand from where to where what action you're supposed to do, correct? So here your brain is actually going to tell you that I am going to concatenate, I mean I'm going to pick, can I say I'm going to pick A2, B2, and then concatenate to, correct? So this is what I'm going to do. So similarly, I'm going to do the same things for, so this is going to be A3 until I reach the end of my data, correct? So this is what I will be doing throughout. And after that, you can either close your Excel sheet, or you can just leave it there, leave the Excel sheet for in case you have other work to be carried on to the Excel sheet. So this is what you will be doing generally when you're going to do on the Excel sheet manually. So always when you do automation, see, compare first what are you going to do manually. If you compare that itself, most of the steps that you will need to automate will be identified there itself. Okay, only the ones that you will be missing are the validations, whether the data is coming correctly, or should I take the right cell. So these are the validations that you might be missing, which we might not be doing it manually. I mean, we might be doing it manually, but you might not be aware that we are doing it manually. Okay, I'll tell you those examples later. So basically what we are going to do, we are going to see opening the Excel, reading the info, and after reading the info, I'm deciding I'm going to copy this and this to this, right? So basically I am going to do the same action on different data across whatever is the length of the data. I'm going to do the same action, but again and again. Can I make it generic to, instead of, So this program, what you will do, if you do it like this, it will work for 3 rows. What if I get 10 rows on a later period? So you have to write it for your generic programming, right? I mean, generically it should work for how many ever rows you get. So generically what I'm going to do is, I'm just going to say this particular stuff, I'm going to take it off and I'm going to put it as instead of row number, we'll see if we can understand with cell number. Okay, so that you will be able to. So, okay, so can I say, instead of making it writing a code which generically, I mean, which does not work for more than 3 rows, right? So instead of this, can I write a code, say, this is my common action. So can I repeat the same action for every data that is in there? So if I repeat the same information, what is the difference here? The difference is only the cell number, correct? The cell index is what is going to be different. So even if it has got 3 rows, it will work. Even if it has got 10 rows, it should work. Even if it has got thousands of rows, it should work, right? After that, what you're going to give? So first thing, cell number will be starting at 2. Then after that, your cell number needs to go to 3, right? So here what we will do? We will do a cell number is equal to the current cell number plus 1. So the next time you're going back to the loop, you're going to say it will start with A3, B3 and concatenate to C3. Okay, so the next time it comes, it will say cell number is equal to, again it will be 4, then it will go to A4, C4 and whatever. So it will do until you reach all the rows. So when you're reaching the 4th row, okay, so this cell number will be at 5 and it will see whether the row is available at 5 or not. So there is no row available at 5, it will just come out of the loop automatically. Okay, so this is what we will be doing whenever you want to convert or whenever you want to do a process for all the rows irrespective of what data is there. So you want to repeat the same action across all information in your Excel sheet. You are going to follow the same logic that will be here. So first you have to open your Excel, then actually you're going to read the info in your info in your Excel sheet. After reading your information, you're going to see what is the common action that you're supposed to perform. So take the common action that you're going to perform, put it inside a loop and repeat it for all the rows. Okay, so thereby your code will be a generic code that will be working for the for how many ever rows that is available in your Excel sheet. Okay, and when I say you're going to do it for all the rows, how will we technically write it? What loop will we use? Had a while, we had a do while, and then we had for each, right? So you are going to use, when you're going to do, irrespective of whatever is your count of your information, whether if you want to do the same action again for each information, then you're going to do a for each. Okay, so whenever you want to do the same action, this you just have to remember. So whenever you want to do, this is the idea of using the loops. Okay, after that there are so many ways that you can explore and you can use it as you get experienced with the software. Okay, it all depends on what kind of data you're going to process. So manually, when you are able to do certain tasks, you should be able to convert the same task of Excel sheet processing into a automated task. So manually you might be copying this cell or this cell, or you might be doing some arithmetic operation, you might be doing multiplication, all those things you might be doing. Everything, if you're doing manually, you should be able to convert it into an automation. You just have to define whether you need to do it for every row or you need to do it for only certain amount of rows. Okay, so at that time you can go ahead and follow the same logic. So this same logic is going to be used whenever you are going to do a repetitive action across all rows. Right. So I'm going to take this particular info and put it onto my next sheet. Okay. So that it doesn't disturb the sheet. So this is what I'm going to do. So copy this particular cell, and I'm going to concatenate this particular cell. Okay. So let's get into our actual programming. So first thing is, whenever you're going to start with the Excel automation, you need to go ahead and use Excel related activities. Okay. By default, Excel related activities are going to be available in your uh, UiPath Studio. If it is not there, you have to go and download it from the manage packages. Okay. So now I'm dragging a flowchart. So I'm going to start with the program. So if you don't have Excel related activities here, go to manage packages and you can install all packages official Excel dot activities. So you'll be getting uipath.excel.activities. By default, this is going to be there in your system. Okay, so you can just go ahead and install it. So that should work. If it is not there, but by default, you're going to have that set up in your every other project uh, that you create, right? So I actually created the Excel sheet in the same project folder. So I created a project and then I created a new Excel sheet here. Okay. So you can create it either by default. It will be creating you can create it under the project structure, or if you want to refer to a different location, you can also refer to a different location, right? So now what we are going to do, we are going to convert the same steps into an automation activity using UiPath Studio. So the first thing I need to open the Excel, right? So there are two Excel related operations that you can have. So one is when you're going to have Excel installed on your system, right? So sometimes there are chances that you might be doing an automation in a server where Excel is not installed, right? So automation activity where Excel is not installed. So at those particular time, you need to work on different activities. Okay, so you might be knowing Excel is again a licensed software. So sometimes there are chances that the customer might not be paying for Excel. So at that time, what you're going to do, you're going to develop the tool, develop the project, or develop your process automation in a place where you have Excel, but use the activities which will work irrespective of whether the Excel is installed or not. Okay, so there are two kinds of activities that you can have. The first activity is going to be the under app integration, when your app is already installed in your system. So app integration, all the activities that is under the app integration. So if you go here, available app integration, so all the activities that is available here needs to be, I mean, it will work seamlessly when your app is integrated that particular application is integrated successfully to UiPath. So it is going to work perfectly when you have the software installed in your particular system. Okay. And the next set of activities is going to be under workbook. So this will be under system dot workbook, system dot file dot workbook. So when you go ahead and look at this particular activity, where is it? System. So system files, and you will be having workbook. So this is also another set of activities that you could work. So this you can use whenever you are going to have activities which are where your Excel, you do not know whether your Excel is installed. Most of the times Excel will be installed. Okay, but suppose your Excel is not installed, you can, where that you will know it when you are actually developing your tool. In your PDD section itself, your customer would be telling you whether they will be having an Excel license or not. If they don't have the Excel license, you can start your development itself with the Excel not being installed, and so you can start your development accordingly with the corresponding activities. Okay, so there are key differences between a workbook dot activities and the Excel dot activities. Okay, so you might see, for example, you might see some of the activities getting repeated in the Excel dot activities as well as workbook dot activities. Okay, so that depends on what kind of activity that you're going to use. Now let's get into first the opening of the Excel. Fine. Right. So we are going to open the Excel first. So whenever you are going to open the Excel, there are two ways of opening it. Okay. You are going to use Excel application scope as your activity under the Excel system app, not system app integration Excel. You would be having Excel application scope. So this is one way of opening it. Okay. So whenever you have Excel that is installed on your system. So whenever Excel is installed on your system, you're going to work on these particular activities. So first we'll see when you're having Excel installed on your system. Okay. So whenever your Excel is installed on your system, you're going to say Excel application scope. So this particular activity, what it will do is it is going to open the Excel, do all the corresponding activities or do all the corresponding work that is going to be done inside the Excel. Everything is going to be combined into one particular activity. So which means what you will do, you will be opening the Excel application scope and you will write all this inside this particular Excel application scope. Okay, so Excel application scope's feature itself is that only. So you could write everything that you're going to do inside the Excel or any kind of operation that you're going to do inside Excel, you're going to write it under one parent. So the parent is going to be Excel application scope. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the Excel, read the information, then I'm going to pick one by one and I'm going to loop the information again and again for each of the row, right? So now I'm going to do, I'm double clicking on this Excel application scope. It will ask me what is the workbook that you want to open. So I can simply go ahead and I can say I'm going to open this particular Excel sheet. Okay, so now the Excel sheet has been opened. Now after Excel sheet being opened, what is my next activity? I'm going to read the information. So what is the information that I'm going to read? You can read the entire Excel book or you could read only the information that you require, or you could give the range and read it, or by default it will say, suppose there are no spaces, there are no this particular data is not at all touched. By default UiPath will read only the data that is there in the that is occupied by the in the cells. So UiPath will automatically read like this. There are multiple options that you can give it in the do it while using the reading of the information from the Excel. So for you to read the information from the Excel, you're going to have to kind of read cell. Okay, read information. So you have read cell and you have read range. Read column is also there. Read cell formula is also there. So in case you have a cell formula and you want to read some formula, you can do. I mean, some Excel sheets come with formulas, right? So you can use even the read cell formula. But the general case that we do is we will use a read range whenever you want to read multiple information, multiple cells in your Excel sheet. And if you want to read a single cell information, you're going to read cell. You're going to use the read cell. Okay. In our case, we are going to read multiple information, right? The full information that we are going to use. So you can use read range. Okay, so which sheet do I need to read? What is the range that I need to read? If you can go and specify that you want to read between A1 and C4. So you can go and specify it here. So I can go and specify it as A1 to C4. This also I can do. Okay. So accordingly, whatever kind of information you want to read, you can read it. Right. So now I'm not specifying anything. So I just want to read the entire Excel sheet. Okay. So this comes into the picture because if you're going to read the entire Excel sheet, it is going to occupy more space also, right? So accordingly, you have to plan while reading your Excel sheet. You're going to plan in such a way what is the data that you're going to read, right? After reading this data, no more I'm going to touch base with the Excel. My UiPath Studio, after reading the data, it is going to hold the data and do the processing. Okay, no more it will come back to the Excel until it is when it will come back to Excel is when you're going to complete the processing and you're going to write the information back to the sheet. So what it is going to do is it will open the Excel, read the information, and after that the connection between an Excel and the UiPath Studio will be disconnected. Okay, so after that it will complete the processing. Whatever processing you want to do, you will be completing the data processing. If you want to do a data processing, arithmetic operation, some kind of processing that you want to do on the data, condition checks that you're doing, all this will be coming under your processing section. For example, all this after the reading, whatever is here down under is going to be under your processing section. So what happens? It is going to disconnect the Excel and it is going to hold the data. All the operations will be taking place in your UiPath front itself. Okay. So when I say when it is going to hold the data and do the processing, this information when it needs to hold inside a box, right, called variable. So whatever information that you have, right? So when I'm giving the control to UiPath Studio, when I'm giving the data to UiPath Studio, the studio has to hold the data with the variable name or with the variable type, correct? So we have structured information here. So what is a variable type it will be holding? It will be held in the variable type called data table. Okay, so since it is a structured information, we are going to read the info and we are going to load that particular information into a data table, and then our connection between Excel and UiPath Studio will be disconnected. After that, we are going to do all the processing related information only with the data that is there in the data table. Okay, so now the same thing I'm going to do here. So what are we doing? After reading this particular information from the Excel, you're going to load this information to a data table. Excel sheet, always it is going to be data table. Okay, so this step is not going to be forgotten by you. Maybe the first time it is going to be difficult to remember, but as you practice, it's going to be the same jargon. Okay, so right. So read info, whenever you want to do a read info, you're going to do a read range or a read cell activity and you're going to load it to a data table. So how are you going to load it? It happens automatically. Okay, so always a read range activity or a read cell activity, a read range activity. Okay, a read range activity will be automatically loading into a data table. Okay, so you just need to create a name and you can tag that particular name of the variable here. So automatically the data will get loaded onto the data table. Okay, fine. So what I was telling, yeah. So we were saying we are going to read the information and load it to the data table. So when I say I'm going to load it to the data table, read range does that automatically. So when read range does that automatically, you are just going to tag a particular variable name and you're going to say you load it to this particular variable name. So which means I need to create a new data table, right? So I'll create a new data table, dt underscore Excel info. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to put it as the data table type, and this is going to be, if you want the scope to be inside the flowchart, you put it inside the flowchart or wherever you want the scope to be available, right? So the moment I create an Excel info data table, I'm going to tag that particular data table, say you load the information into this particular data table. So now the data table, if I give it in the in the output section, the Excel data, whatever you're reading, is going to be loaded into this particular information. Okay, so this happens automatically. You just need to give the name of the variable name of the data table, and it will be directly loading your particular code, particular info. So now what is going to be in your data table? Your data table is going to have this particular information. Correct? So this is going to be there in your data table. So because data table is also going to be in the same format of rows and columns, correct? So you're going to have the same kind of information, but what it is going to be here, we are referring it as A1, A2, A3. Here in data table, we are not going to refer it as A1, A2, A3. We are going to refer this as with the corresponding cell index. The second way of taking the information is R case. When you want to iterate and do the same information, or you want to iterate the data and you want to do kind of processing inside that particular data. Okay, so let's consider this particular example for case 2. One second. Okay, right now we're going to have it like this. So in this case, what we are going to do is, usually this is how the structure is going to be. Okay, but whenever you want to iterate information, so that time when you're going to use for each, now your for each has got a for each data table. So it has got a for each data table. Generally you have got for each twice, right? So I said one was for each row and the other one was for each control. Okay, and for data table, since most of the data is going to be processed as a data table, UiPath has given you a direct for each row inside a data table. Okay, so we will be using this now, almost like 80% of the projects you'll be using this whenever you're going to have structured data, right? So that is why they have given an explicit for each data table, for each row inside data table. So whenever you're going to take that particular scenario, now the condition is going to be different. Okay, the existing structure of your data table is like this, but I'm going to say for each row. So when I'm going to say for each row, at that time what is going to happen is, this will become, say, data table. This is going to be a for each row inside. Okay, so this time what we are going to do is, we are going to take the data table as the row is going to be the keyword here. Okay, so always it is going to be only one row at a time, correct? So when you're doing for each row, which means for each of the rows you're going to take the information, right? So what we are going to do is, we are no more going to take the row location, because only one row is going to be there at a time. Did you understand? When I'm going to do a processing for each row, I'm going to say for each only one row, correct? So for each row, where this is going to be the active row the first time. So which is only one row is available. This is going to be active row the second time. So here also only one row is available. This is going to be active the third time. So here again, when it is processing, only one row is available. But if you see, the columns are going to be available. The data is available across columns, but the row is going to be just one information. So here you need not have a index for the rows. It is always going to be row of 0. Okay, so here always you can refer it as row. Instead of putting the index as 0, you can always measure it as row. And here for the column alone, you can give the index. So if I take row of 0, then it is going to give me Rahul. Okay, so when you have loops information, which means for each row, as the name suggests, every time you're going to have only one row in the data table to process. So first row will be this one, and then the second row will be this one. Second row in the sense, the next active row will be this one, and then the active row will be this one. So every time you're going to have only one active row. So we are calling that as simply row. We are not giving any index. The index will be given only to the column. So if you're going to say row of for the first loop, okay, if you're going to have row of 0, if you're going to have row of 1, then you will be getting. So the next time it is going out of your loop, right? So if you're getting out of your loop and you're going on to the second loop, again what will happen? Row of 0 is going to be the second information. So what I'm going to do is, for each row inside data table. So I'm taking data table Excel1. So now 3 information is there. It is going to group 3 times. Okay, right. So when I'm going to take, I need to pick the information of Rahul first. So what I'm going to pick is, I will say assign. You can directly pick it, but for you to understand, I'm saying it in this particular way. Okay. So I'm going to create a new variable called string, and I'll say str first name. Okay. So there is string getting created. So now I'm going to say row of 0. So what is this particular row? This row is a term that you give it. It could be even your name. If you give your name, you use your name here. If you give something else, you use this here. Here by defaultly they have specified row, which means each row. Okay, one active row at a time. So here row of 0, you have to always convert it into a string because there is a string information. So you always have to convert it. So dot to string. So now what will be loaded onto this particular information? Row of 0. So what is the active row? The active row is this. So first time the active row is this. So what will be row of 0? Rahul will be taken and Rahul will be loaded onto str first name. So this is the active row. Okay. So what I'm going to take is, I'm going to take, in general, when you're doing the manual automation also, you're taking this, then you're writing it here, you're taking this, then you're writing it here with a space, correct? So the same thing I'm going to do. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put this into str first name, which in turn will be giving you Rahul. Okay, so this is your first row. Then I'm going to say str last name is equal to row of 1. Now this is going to equal to, right? Now I'm going to say str full name is equal to str first name, concatenate, add a space which is inside the double quotes, concatenate str last name. So what it will be resulting in? It will result Rahul space Srivastava. So this happens in the first loop. So when it goes to the second loop, so what is going to happen when it goes to the second loop? Again, you're taking row of 0, row of 1. So here it will be replaced to Nidhu and Kumar, and then it will be taking Nidhu Kumar. I'm going to create. So this is a generic thing, but it will work commonly for every information that it is there, right? So can I put it into terms like another assign? I can take it as Control K, which is I'm creating a new variable str last name, and this is going to be row of 1 dot toastring. Okay, because it is inside the data table, because this particular information is inside the data table, you can directly specify it as row of. You need not give the data table name. Okay, because you are already inside the data table, you can directly specify row of 0 and you can take it. If you don't want to take it like this, okay, there are an alternate method. Instead of taking the index, you can also take the header information. So what was the header? Last name. So you can directly take it like this also. For teaching, I'm teaching you this method. Okay, but usually this is the best practice that you have to do. So now I can say another assign, and I can say str. So I need to create a variable, Control K, str full name is equal to, what is it? Str first name, concatenate, double quotes, add a space, again concatenate str last name. So now you will be doing the same thing for all the loops. So first time it will be Rahul Srivastava, so it will come. Then the next loop, Midhu Kumar, automatically it will go to the next loop. Automatically it will go to the third loop. Everything will be happening. So after everything happens, now what you're going to do, you're going to come up to the loop and your program will finish. Right? Two ways of writing it, okay? You can take the entire data table, you can write it to the data table, then copy this entire information from the data table and paste it here. This is one way of writing. Okay, you got me? Otherwise, what you can do is this processing, instead of writing it to the data table, see, when you write it to the data table, what happens? You have to copy the entire data table. This is only 3 rows, so it is not going to occupy the memory. But when you have a bigger information, you're going to copy the entire information and you're going to paste it here. So which means already 2 information is there. You need only this information. In that case, why do you want to copy the entire table and paste it? Correct? So that might become unnecessary. You can do that also. But the smarter way of doing is, instead of updating the data table, okay, data table can be updated when you're having more than number of rows that you need to update or whatever, more information you need to update. But here our information is only one column I need to update, right? So instead of updating the data table, my end result is I need to update the Excel sheet. So I can directly come and update here. Okay, you understood the difference? You can update the data table and copy the entire data table and place it here. Okay, that is one way of updating the Excel sheet. But I already, so the data table has got only three rows, three columns. Two columns are already available here. Just for one column, why should I copy and occupy a huge space? Right? So instead of that, so if suppose you are having multiple columns and you want to, you are updating it, and you want to update the entire table, this makes sense because you have too much of information that you want to update. You don't want to come and hit back to the Excel again and again, but come and write back to the Excel. So this should be working fine. You can copy the entire data table and you can write it back. Otherwise, when you have scenarios like this where you want to only update one column, instead of writing it to data table, then copying the data table and coming and placing it here, you can directly write it to Excel. Okay, so you read the Excel and you want to directly write it to Excel. So now consider, if you want to update into the data table, you can directly update row of 2 in the data table as the full name, and you can copy the entire data table back to Excel sheet later once everything is done. Okay, so that time you can change. Otherwise, what you can do is, at the end of every loop, which means when I read and concatenate, I can come back to Excel and I can write, so that when it is taking this active row, it will come and write it here. When it is taking this active row, it can come and write it here. When it is taking this active row, it can come and write it here. See, the writing part, because it is only one column and we have very less information, I'm doing this writing every time coming back to Excel and writing it. If you don't want to write like that, you can write it directly to the data table. This particular logic will be working based on your project requirement, how much of data that you actually handle. Okay, based on the data, you could decide on, you need to make the justification whether you want to write it directly into the data table and copy the information, or you want to directly come and write it to the Excel. So that jurisdiction you make it. Okay, but you can do it either ways. Now when you're doing it with the data table, directly you can update it like this, saying row of 2 is equal to the full name, or you can give row of full name is equal to the str full name, then copy the entire data table there. So when I'm going to copy the entire data table there, or when I'm going to write the entire information from the data table there, I can use two kind of information, two kind of activity. So I'm going to take the second scenario where I'm going to directly come and write it to the Excel. Okay, at that time I don't want this, I'm doing a comment, control D. Okay, so this is going to be, we comment out this particular activity. So I want only until the full name. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to write it back to the Excel. So writing it back to the Excel, so here I'll say, okay, so here when I'm going to come back from a data table to Excel, I'm going to refer the cell numbers, right? So I need to know where I need to write. Otherwise Excel won't understand. If I'm giving index as 0, 1, 2, 3, Excel won't understand. Right? I need to refer inside Excel as, I need to write it into C2, I need to write it into C3, I need to write it into C4. Right? So what I'm going to say is, I'm going to write it into C3, C4, C5, C6, whatever column I need to write. If you have D, if you can write it in D. If you have H, you can write it in H. Or if you have multiple columns that you're going to update, you can go and write it in the corresponding columns. So what is the activity that you will be using for writing it back to Excel? So there are two write activities. Okay, one is write range, when you want to copy the entire range of information. So when you want to copy the entire data table to Excel, you can say write range. Okay, if you don't have, okay, so there are two write ranges. One is inside Excel, one is inside workbook. So you can use write range whenever you want to take bunch of information and you want to update it into Excel. But in our case, I don't want to take bunch of information. I'm going to copy these two and I'm going to write it here. I'm going to copy these two, write it here. So it is, I'm going to write cell by cell, correct? So this is a cell that I'm going to write, then I'm going to write it in this cell, then I'm going to write it in this cell. So here I'm going to take write cell. So we are using under app integration. So we'll take under app integration. Okay. So it is going to ask. So which sheet I need to write? I need to write it in sheet 1. So where do I need to write? I need to write it in C1. So I'll go and say I need to write it in C1. What I need to write? I need to write the concatenated name. So where is the concatenated name? Concatenated name is in str full name. Sorry. Correct? So I just did, I copied the information row by row, and I'm going to say I'm writing it back to C1. So what it is going to do the first time. So it will open the Excel, it will read the Excel, convert it into a data table, and for each item inside the data table, I'm going to say for each row. The str first name is going to be this first name, row of 0. Then the str's last name is going to be the active row, which is row of column 1. So Srivastava. So what is full name? You could simply say it as row of 0 plus row of 1. So you can do it like that, or str first name concatenate str last name. Then you're taking str full name. So now instead of updating the data table, I'm going to directly connect back to the Excel and I'm going to update. So where I need to update? I need to update on C1 the full name, which I already have it in the variable. So I'm taking the variable and I'm going to write it. So I say write cell sheet 1 C1 str full name. Okay. It has finished. The running has been finished. So I wrote it in C1 instead of writing it in C2. I wrote it in C1. So it has got this. Wait, let me execute it again. This was full name, right? This is I need to write it in C2, right? I need to start my writing at C2. Did you see the difference? First it wrote Rahul Srivastava, then it wrote Midhu Kumar, then it wrote Sanjay Yadav on the third loop. So because we mentioned it as C2, everything it is writing in C2 only. But now I need to specify, no, don't write everything in C2. You write the first one starting at C2, then C3, then C4. So as you proceed with the loop, you can go ahead and proceed this also, increment this also. How do we write it into Excel? Okay, so when you're writing into Excel, you need to refer the column name. So if it is going to be C, you refer and you give the start position. After the start position, if you're going to use a for each, you're going to do incrementing only here, because this is not going to be an automatic increment, right? Writing back to Excel does not have a direct relation with the for each loop. For each loop is a UiPath activity, but writing to Excel is Excel dependent, correct? So you cannot do an automatic increment there. A for each will not automatically increment. So what you're going to do is, the first time you write it in C2, then you're going to say, next time you're going to write it in C3, then you're going to say that as you proceed with the loop, you're going to say increment the C column also, the cell also. So how do you do? You're going to use the concept of counters here. Okay. This also, the logic will remain as such. Okay, so you're going to use the same logic when you're going to write it into an Excel. You can use Excel counters. So you define what is your start position. So your start position is going to be 2. Okay, and then say every time you increment 2 plus 1. So it will be 3. Then you say 3 plus 1. Then it will be 4. Then you say 4 plus 1. So automatically it will be writing, the first time it will be writing in C2, then it will be writing in C3, then it will be writing in C4, C5. Okay, so can I write it like this? This is going to be the same logic that you might be using everywhere when you're writing it back to Excel. I'll change everything to scope flowchart. I'm going to add a Excel counter. So the Excel counter is going to be the counter which is going to give me the actual cell reference value. Okay, so I'm going to say int Excel counter. So this is going to be integer and flowchart. So what should be my start position here? The start position should be 2, correct? C2.
C2.
So I'll say my start position is going to be 2. Right? So if you don't have this information, if you don't have the header information, then your start position is going to be 1. So accordingly, you have to change. Okay. So this start position you give. After giving your start position, what I'm going to say is, write it first to C. Instead of giving it as C, I'm going to say C concatenate int Excel counter. Okay, so what will be? It will be directly be C2 now. Correct? So when I need to come back to the next information, what should I do? The int Excel counter is equal to int Excel counter plus 1. So from 2, it will be equated to 3. So next thing it will be C3. So it is C int Excel counter concatenation will be C3, then C4, then C5. It will automatically increment as you go through the loop. I'll write it. After that, you will be able to understand. So what I'm doing is, so instead of write cell at C2, I'm going to say write at C concatenate int Excel counter. Okay. Right? So if I say this, now it will start at C2. So the first thing it will be writing at C2. And after this, now I need to make it to C3, right? So what I'm going to do is, I will say assign int Excel counter is equal to int Excel counter plus 1. So from 2 it will go to 3. So now what will happen? So let me bring this down. So when it comes first, so it is reading, it is getting into the Excel. So at this point, what is going to, it is getting into the data table. At this point, what was the position? It was 2. So now it is going to read everything, come to right cell, and it is going to say C2, I'm going to write. Now it is going to increment from 2 to 3. Now you're end of the loop, right? You're end of the first loop. Now again, it will go to the next loop. So now your position is 3. So again, do the same processing. It will come down. It will write at C3. Again, you will increment it. So so now it was 3 plus 1. So go C4. 4 plus 1. C5. 5 plus 1. C6. So it will be incrementing. And when it reaches the last data, okay. So suppose at this position, okay. So it is at C4. Okay. So writing it to C4. After C4, it is going to say 4 plus 1, 5. But the loop will automatically come out. So at fifth position, automatically it will come out. Nothing it will be writing. It's going to start at position 2. I'm running it. So first is C2, C3, C4. It has run. See fifth. Already it has exited out of the loop. So no more information it is processing.